Boundaries. When I think of boundaries, I think about social, historic boundaries and boundaries in time. But I think when I travel to work, I often think about boundaries between myself and other people and their worlds, and interesting things that I read about a few years back was that there, in German language there is a word for sudden acknowledgement of other people's lives. And I think it's a shame that in my native Russian language or in English it's a difficult to explain concept. And I'm making this recording in our office so you can hear in the background all the conversations of other people that I am not aware of most of my day. And I find it very interesting that now and again you have this realization that you are surrounded by people with all these invisible boundaries of our days and hours spent together but apart, and sometimes apart but together. And this is something that I wanted to share in this recording.
An extract from Walter Benjamin, One Way Street, 1924. Buildings are used as a popular stage. They are all divided into innumerable, simultaneously animated theatres. Balcony, courtyard, window, gateway, staircase, roof are at the same time stages and boxes.
On this site, on this day, the archaic dualities of modernism are challenged. Square versus street, tower versus block, public versus private. The functional ordering of space accosted, the scaleless juxtaposition of form, of sight. Murky encounters, my reality.
I wrote about Belfast for my Part 2 dissertation. Initially, I was looking at the creation of physical built boundaries and the role of modern planning in a city that's had a technocratic rather than democratic leadership. Belfast is blighted by things like a shopping centre service yard being built over one of the oldest roads in the city, a surface car park in an old market square, and the most crass urban motorways that create a series of inhospitable environments and crossings along their edge. The more I read up on this, the more I realised that boundaries are used to create territory, and that wealth is used to territorialise civic centres into spaces for retail, along with the parking and road structures demanded to service them. However, there are two sides to boundaries such as these. The actions had their benefit in that they created development, employment and leisure opportunities in a very difficult time in the life of this city, but little thought was given to the physical and subconscious boundaries that were erected on the other side, and the communities that would lose all sense of their own civic spaces, allied with the trauma of the Troubles, creating or adding to a series of cultures based on community isolation and mistrust, and the erection of metaphysical boundaries. In my research, I read about an old French farming tradition where the eldest son was walked around the perimeter of the land on his birthday and was pinched by his father, in an effort to relate trauma and boundary and to imbue a culture of care for the land.
The boundary or entrance to a public building, for example, say a favourite gallery, usually brings back memories of the last fab exhibition I saw there, or also possibly a not so good one. Then I'm likely to be full of anticipation or, feeling hopeful for the one I'm on my way to see. And especially if it's a favourite artist.
Something happens to you when you step inside a space. An immediate unconscious projection, identification and exchange takes place. We occupy the space and the space settles in us. We grasp the space through our senses and we measure it with our bodies and movements. This is the most important moment in architecture. Not without reason do we have the threshold and the door, that narrow crossable line between indoors and outdoors, between private and public, loaded with meanings. Robert Venturi may consider the wall an architectural event in his complexity and contradiction in architecture, but the threshold and the door go beyond that event. After all, the designing of architecture is more than just giving form to space. It is making divisions between spaces and giving place, structure, and order to things. Of course, it is only by means of that division, the wall, that the space, the place, is created, with a spatial condition of its own. But it is the wall that receives and unites within itself the tension between the private and the public, between indoors and outdoors. This only really becomes visible in the window and felt in the door.
There, on the threshold and in the movement of the door, the essence of the entire architectural construction is concentrated. Not only is the boundary penetrated there, but it also becomes accessible. It can be crossed. This is where the conditions of indoors and outdoors collide without there being any material to intercept that collision. That crossing makes it possible for humans to be human, according to philosopher Hannah Arendt. Coming home as well as going out into the world. No life can be lived totally on the streets without it gradually falling apart. But the person who remains indoors also fades away. The safety and security of the home and the blinding light of the outside world need each other, are inseparably connected by the door and the threshold. A person who steps outdoors is watched, questioned, weighted. A person who steps indoors can drop the mask.
Sublime is what the experience of stepping over the threshold must be, moving from one's own domain into the world, going out into public space, and vice versa, coming home. Sublime is the experience beyond the edge. The threshold and the doors symbolizes this, give it space and possibilities. The threshold is the boundary, a line that becomes space.